come right back in.
Okay.
We're celebrating with the one and only Steve Lynch. If you know him and love him from Autograph, but he is now an author, the incredible book Confessions of a Rock Guitarist, and you talk about these incredible challenges, learning and committing yourself to the instrument early on,
Hmm.
but falling prey to some of the dangers out there, and
Yeah.
you learned how to kind of reel yourself in, and
Hmm.
you had these amazing opportunities. I mean, to go out on tour on the Van Halen 1984 tour. In
Right.
retrospect, you got to look now like, man, I think every band in the world would have wished they were on that tour. How the
Yeah.
hell did we
Yeah.
get on it? And
Right.
we
Right.
were we weren't a band with a following. We had to come up with a
Yeah.
name.
Yeah. And so, like I explained how we got on, it was kind of a freak thing. And then the rest of the tours we got on, that wasn't through RCA. That was like people that we just knew, in
Isn't that
LA.
right?
And yeah, it was
Like
all
Motley
through.
Crue knew you guys could deliver.
Yeah.
They probably
Right.
saw you on the Van Halen tour and said, "Hey, man, you want to come with us?"
Yeah.
Theater
Absolutely.
Pain was the big follow up to their,
Yeah.
big breakthrough,
Yeah.
Shout at the Devil album.
Right, right, exactly. It was a great album, and we had a blast with those guys. We really did,
Oh,
as you can tell by my writings in the book. But the party had to end at some point. So
well, Nicky is told in his books, and we all know
yeah,
that he flatlined a couple times,
yeah. And
like
I was
he,
living right up the street
oh,
from
were
him.
you right up by
Yeah, I was
Franklin up
on
there? Franklin La
Fuller.
Brea? Yeah.
Yeah, I was on Fuller just up from
Okay.
Ventura. So you go straight down from my place, and that's Nikki's place right there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so you cross Ventura Boulevard and go by the newsstand,
Right.
and then that's his place right there. And so
Oh, my
he was
gosh.
right down the street when all that happened. I was living just up the street from him. So
Yeah, I remember he had crashed his Porsche or something, wrapped it around a tree, and broke his arm while he was even recording Theater of Pain. I spoke
yeah,
with Tom Werman, the producer, and just hearing those stories. And
yeah,
I think he was living with Lita Ford at the time. But
hmm
yeah, no, they were dancing with the devil. That's for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely. And luckily those guys survived. I didn't. You know, when I at the end of that tour, I the way they were behaving, I didn't think they were going to survive. But then, Doc McGee
Doug
and
Thaler.
yeah, Doug Taylor, they basically said, we're bailing unless you guys straighten up. You remember that whole
Oh
talk,
yeah,
and so
I
yeah, they were going to
remember.
lose their
I
management unless they
remember.
got straight.
I remember Doc saying, that Russia benefit they were doing because Doc had some legal troubles and they were trying to don't
Mm-hmm.
say no to everybody this Russia festival.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't want to send those guys over there because I think they're going to come back in body bags.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
I mean, Doug Thaler didn't even want to be even mentioned in the dirt as you see in the
Right.
film.
Yeah. Right.
There's a
Right.
character
Yeah.
playing Doc, but there is no Doug Thaler in the movie.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
it's
Yeah.
he
I
threatened
was
like,
wondering
man.
about that when I
Yeah, he
watched it
said
too.
keep my name out of this, man. You
Yeah.
guys are fucking
Yeah, but I
nuts.
think that they were like looking at actually, bailing on managing them. That's what I had heard, because
Well,
we
they
we
figured it was
just
going to
got done.
crash and burn, and there would be an obituary any day now.
Yeah, right,
Especially with
right.
Nicky.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
But
so it was a good thing, they got cleaned up after that because they had to, and
yeah.
so I
Well,
was I was
famously,
glad to
by
see
the
that.
time they did Doctor Feelgood, with Bob Rock, they
Yeah,
were quote sober. You know,
right. Yeah, exactly.
so
As much as you can be sober,
right.
really.
I mean, I don't know who was falling around all day, but you
Yeah,
know, I mean, Nicky made a point, and he's of course totally sober now.
yeah,
I mean, you can't do that business at that level
no.
and wake up with a hangover every day, or
I
like
think
I
that's one
say,
of the things that people don't realize is that just the touring itself, the traveling on the tour buses, the flights, and just the weird hours. It's like you get done playing and then you think, okay, great, I get to chill out for the rest of the night. No, 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 you've got an interview you got to do here, and then you got to get up tomorrow and you got to do a TV interview. And
yeah,
so
you got to be on
it's
the
it's
radio at
constantly
5:30 in the morning or something.
right. It's crazy stuff like that. And so it's really taxing on you physically, but then also mentally, because you got to keep all these things going on the side. There's, like I said, there's all these interviews and all these other things you have to be involved with. And people don't realize just how hard it really is.
Well,
Do it
yeah.
while
I
you're
mean,
young, because, yeah.
sometimes you're lucky to get like an hour nap. I mean,
Right,
it's
right.
it's
And
it's
it's hard to
on
sleep
the
on the
go.
tour bus. It's really a bitch to sleep
Yeah.
on a tour bus. It's
Well,
super
especially if you're a
noisy.
lighter sleeper, man. There's people
Yeah,
talking
like
and
me.
yelling
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, people
So,
stomping around and depending on what bunk you're on, especially if you're on the lower bunk, man. That
yeah.
sounds like
I
an
was on
army
I was
marching
on the
through there.
middle bunk in the back.
Okay, the
Yeah.
middle. Yeah, it was. You kind of caught some rest wherever you could, but
Yep,
it was all
exactly.
about the show. As long as you
Yeah,
could put on that show,
yeah,
that's where the rubber meets the road.
yeah, that's right. Exactly. So, but
Wow.
it was a fantastic, just an amazing experience, the whole 80s, Um, well, I should say from the late 80s into the early 90s,
Yeah.
but yeah, after touring and everything, I mean, Autograph broke up in 1989, December of
Okay.
'89, so it was the end of the '80s, literally
Now,
the end.
now,
But
what year did Turn Up the Radio and Sign In Please come out?
that was '84.
84.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the tail end of '84, because remember that's when we were on tour, and then RCA brought us off the road to start the album, and we did the album, and then we released Turn Up the Radio, I think in October of
Oh, wow.
'84. But you see, the thing is that's you're looking at all this competition from all these well-known artists that are putting out Christmas albums. So
Right.
it kind of just got lost, and so RCA re-released it. And what we did was we went on into the studio for a couple of days, and we said all these radio stations, the
The
call
radio
letters for all these.
promos.
Yeah. And so what we did is we said each station, and we said turn it up, KNAC or whatever it may be,
Right. Kilo
and
or whatever it was.
we did this for 2 straight days, 8 hours each day, all the
Wow.
W radio stations and all the K radio stations,
Yeah.
and it helped tremendously. These stations absolutely loved it. And so when we really re-released it in January of 2085, it just took off. And then it was in heavy. We did the video, and it was in heavy rotation on MTV too. That was it. It's still in the early stages of MTV, actually. So,
Yeah, MTV
so
had started in the early 80s and
yeah,
by the mid 80s, it was more important than 10,000 radio stations. If you got
yeah,
on
absolutely.
MTV,
Everybody had their eyes
not
glued
only
on
did
that.
they know
Yeah,
what you sounded like, they know what you look like.
right, right.
And if you
So,
had a cool look, they're like, man, I want to go see those guys live.
right, right, exactly. So
Wow.
it was a huge marketing.
Now, by the time you were
Strategy.
doing the MotleyCrue tour, were you
Uh-huh.
on the second album after Sign In
Yes,
Please?
yes,
Okay.
that was on the second album.
You were
Yeah,
on the follow up.
right.
Okay.
And then on the third album, well, no, let's see, it was on the second album. We also did some shows with Aerosmith, and then I think it was on the third album we were doing shows with Heart.
Okay.
And we did early on. We did some shows with Brian Adams and
And this was the
Ronnie
second.
James Dio too.
Okay.
Yeah,
And this was
yeah,
the second version of Heart with Howard Leese and Denny Carmassi and
yes, yeah.
Matt Andes.
No, no. It was on the Bad Animals tour.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, that
so
was the second version as
yeah,
opposed to Roger Fisher and
yeah. No, it wasn't with Roger.
Steve
Roger
Fossen
was.
and those guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
When I was living up in Bellingham, 76, 77, I was
Uh-huh.
helping to promote. I was working with Perry
Oh, okay.
Scope
Yeah,
Productions in Vancouver and John Bauer, and their
yeah.
manager was, running Albatross, and all that.
Oh,
So
okay.
they were obviously breaking out big with Dreamboat Annie, which was considered not only an indie album, but it was Mushroom Records was based out of
Mushroom
Canada.
Records out of Vancouver,
Yeah,
BC. Yeah,
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 British Columbia. So
yeah.
they got that benefit of the Canadian content.
Hmm.
So they were actually bigger in Canada than they
Right,
were
right,
even in the States.
right. But they were an actual Seattle band, and that's where
Yeah.
I remember them from back in the '70s. Is they used to play at the Parker's Ballroom in Aquarius, which is the same thing, and the Ad Lib and My Place and
Oh,
those
wow.
those kind of places that I used to play at, back, way back in '73, '74, and
Yeah.
so I knew of them back then, when they were just starting out,
Right.
basically,
Magic Man and
Yeah,
Crazy on
right.
You was out.
Yeah, right. And so it was like a full circle coming around, just like with the Van Halen thing.
Yeah.
They used to open up for Wolfgang, which was, the part of Autograph. And then the
Sure.
same thing with Heart, we're opening up with Heart. But for me, being a Seattle guy, I knew them from way back then, before they were real big, and so it
Oh,
was really
yeah.
cool to see that, that I'm on tour with them, I'm going, who would have thought this, all these years
Right.
later,
The Wilson
so
sisters. Yeah.
yeah, right.
Pretty
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah. No, it
yeah,
was, you were in that rarefied air, with
yeah.
the little
Right,
groups that, made it through.
right.
And
Yeah, exactly.
now I know famously there's all this pressure because you're getting
Yeah,
on
oh
the
God.
radio, would turn up the radio, and RCA is like, man, give us another hit, man. We got to go back in and make another record, and we got to
Yeah,
get you guys back on tour.
yeah.
How did you
You
guys
remember
deal
back
with that
then?
pressure of, have,
Well, you remember that that's just the way it was back in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. What they tried to do is it became so commercialized, and it became very corporate, and they just wanted you to churn out as much as you could. But the thing is that what happened with Autograph is after Turn Up the Radio, that's a heavy one to follow up, and there is a lot of pressure on that. Everybody thinks that once you've made it, then you've made it. No, that means you
right?
have
They
to
figure
try
you're
even harder.
coasting, you're
Yeah,
coasting
right,
from there.
right. But no, then it's then the pressure's really on you at that point. And so, but we had to go into the studio right away because they pulled us off the road after the first album, after we were touring, after the first album. And then we went right in. We had another 30 days to do the second album, but we were on tour the whole time between the first album and the second album. So we didn't have a lot of time to write. All of our writing was on the tour of us,
Yeah.
the whole album. So when we got in, it didn't come out quite the way we wanted. It was a good album. A lot of people love some of the songs in there, like Blondes and Black Cars and all that, and
Uh-huh.
which got a lot of radio play itself. But uh, right in that time era was when Bob Summers died, basically the president of RCA, and then it was
Yeah.
making a switch over to Bob Buziak, and so there was a lot of bands that didn't get pushes on their releases at that time because of the fact that they went through like 50% of their personnel, at
Oh,
both the New
wow.
York offices and the LA offices. So it was in transition. So it wasn't only us that kind of took a hit from that. It was the Pointer Sisters, the Eurythmics,
Uh-huh.
Kenny Rogers. Uh,
Okay.
oh God. Oh, the list goes on. Oh, remember Mr. Mister? They
Oh,
took a big
sure.
hit from that because their
Yeah.
first album went quadruple platinum, and then the
Yeah.
second one
Couple
just
big hits. Yeah.
yeah. And so yeah, so I used to talk with Steve Farrell, the guitarist, Steve Ferris, the guitarist from
Right.
Mr. Mister.
Uh-huh.
We used to meet down at that little what was it called? Luna's, I think it was, the Mexican restaurant down in Ventura, right there on Fulton and Ventura.
Oh yeah. The what's it called? The
Not Luna's, it was
Casa Vega.
yeah, that was it.
Casa
God,
Vega.
I'm amazed you remember that.
I just spoke to Ricky
Yeah.
Phillips recently, who played with the
Oh yeah,
Babies and
yeah,
Bad
yeah.
English, and
Oh yeah,
he used to go
yeah.
there like every night.
Oh
Casa
yeah,
Vegas was the hang, man. The
yeah. That's
drinks, the
I did
meals.
too. I saw him in there a couple of times. I saw Steve Ferris in there. That's where the guitars from
Yeah,
Mr.
man. They
Mister and
had good
stuff. And
food.
so,
It wasn't
oh
expensive. Free
yeah,
parking.
yeah.
How can you
Great
beat it?
margaritas.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just like yeah. And so that was just like it was like a secret because it was in the valley, so not a lot of people knew about it.
Oh
Everybody
man,
was
you
always
you you had more rock stars there than anywhere in
oh God,
Hollywood.
yeah, yeah, right. But
I mean, Edward Van Halen moved to Coldwater. All these
yeah,
guys,
right,
everybody lived
yeah.
over there.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, there we were, and so he was telling me about the hardships they were going through during that RCA transition as well. So
Yeah, a lot of people don't know. It's hard enough to come up with the hit, but even if
yeah,
you have what you think is a hit, you have
yeah,
the competition within the label to be the
right,
priority push. There's only
yeah,
so much budget. You
yeah,
talk to these radio promoters, and they're constantly being told in meetings like, no, don't worry about that band. This is the one you got to
Yeah.
push.
Right, right, exactly. And what they were pushing a lot at that time was this new Elvis box set was coming out, and they're going, okay, well, that's great. Of course, that's going to be a huge bestseller for you. But I'm thinking, what about all your other bands that you have here?
Yeah, like new music.
Yeah,
Elvis
but
wasn't making
that's
anything
what
new.
happened during that time, and so like I said, those artists took a big hit from it, and the Eurythmics too. I mean, they were huge then.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah. Sweet Dreams had already
yeah,
come out, and
yep, exactly.
subsequent albums weren't getting a big push.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
at one point in the later '80s, I was
Uh-huh.
the senior vice president of Cashbox. Cashbox
Oh
was
yeah.
the one-time rival to Billboard. Matter of fact, the American
Hmm.
Music Awards, Dick Clark's, competition to the Grammys was all based on the Cashbox charts. And
Right.
our offices were right across the street from RCA over there. You
Oh,
had the
okay. Yeah.
Cinerama Dome, you had the RCA
Yeah.
building.
Right. Cimarron. That's where I
Yeah,
saw.
Cashbox was
That's where I saw.
6464 Sunset.
I said, God, what did I see there? I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey there.
Oh, wow.
That was so epic because they had that big curved screen, and then
Oh,
yeah, but
sure.
RCA was just straight across the street from.
That's it.
So, yeah.
I remember Diane Warren had offices up in that
Yeah.
building.
Right. Yeah.
Used to crank out hits every day.
Yeah. Exactly. Every day. That's about right.
Yeah, but working at a trade magazine like Billboard or Cashbox, you saw
Yeah.
the full page ads every week.
Yeah.
These magazines
That's right.
came out every week. I mean,
Yeah.
those radio promoters,
Yeah.
man, they got their hand on the fire. They're literally, having to report to their boss and boss's boss how
Yeah.
many ads
Right.
they got, how many stations
Right.
added the new
Yeah.
song. Man, it was cutthroat.
Yeah, it really was, and a lot of payola too back in
Oh
those
my
days.
God.
So
There was so
yeah.
many favors being done.
Oh God, yeah,
People
yeah,
ask me, "Is payola still around?" I'm like, "Well, anytime you got like 10,000 artists trying to fit through 10 slots, yeah, there's
yeah. Right,
favors being
exactly.
done,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
you want to call it."
yeah. It
You
was
know, it's
almost mafioso.
oh yeah, it's like what? Will you need me to put your kids through college, or you need a
Yeah,
new car, or you need
yeah,
your rent paid? I mean, it was like,
yeah.
add my
I
record,
remember,
man.
living in that atmosphere, and of course, you were right in the midst of all of it, and so um, you hear about the inner workings of all this, and you just go, God, they really do all this stuff. There's actually slots if you want to buy a number one slot billboard and all that. Now, they don't want you talking about that, of course, but back then it was happening, and they knew it. In fact, they got in trouble for it. So,
Well,
you know,
let's put it this way: if you were the person at a big time station deciding, and back then it
yeah,
usually came down to one or two people at a station, you
yeah,
had that power. You also have these relationships with these radio promoters, and they're
absolutely,
they're
yeah,
schmoozing you. Let's go out to dinner, and I got a gift for you, and
correct,
sometimes it's subtle, but at
yeah,
the same time they're saying, "Man, do me a favor, add that record on Monday. I really need you to, man. Thanks."
yeah, right,
So
sure,
it wasn't always blatant, like here's cash in an envelope. Sometimes it's just like they
yeah,
are schmoozing you heavy, man. That
absolutely,
that
heavy
American
favors,
Express, yeah, that
yeah.
expense account was dinging, 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 man, every night.
That's right. God bless them all. I mean, it's just the way the business
Can you
was.
imagine working in the accounting department, the label, looking
Oh my
looking at
God,
some of these
yeah.
promotion guys,
Uh,
American Express, bills. They're
it's
like, "What?
laundering.
You
It's
spent
laundering.
$12,000 at dinner?" That's
Right. Yeah. It's laundering numbers, not money. It's like a whole different thing. But that's it. You want to buy a number is what you're doing. So,
oh, well,
but
I always say people were hired or fired depending on where their song hit the charts that week.
yeah, that's right.
Literally,
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
boss is giving you a pink slip on Friday, like, dude,
Yeah.
man, you
And talking
didn't.
about one of those, $10,000, $12,000 dinners. We went to New York to do a Headbangers Ball thing, and we were co-hosting with Ozzy Osbourne,
Oh
which
wow.
was a great story in itself. I'm sure you read that. But anyway, RCA took us out to dinner that night, and they said, "Yeah, come on," and then, they said, "Yeah, drink up, get whatever you want," and da da da. And so it was a $10,000 dinner. It was at the Park and
Yeah,
Meridian.
you're looking at the
Yeah.
most expensive thing on the menu,
Oh,
not
absolutely.
realizing this is coming out of your record royalty.
That's right. And then, a week later, our manager, Susie Frank, she said, "Hey guys, what's this $10,000 bill from RCA that we just received?" And we said, "Well," they said, "they were taking us out to dinner." She goes, "No, no, 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 no. They never pay for anything. Anything that seems like a favor, you're paying for that." Okay.
It always
Yeah,
gets billed to
always.
somebody
Yeah, it
else.
does. That's right. It's not RCA that's paying for that. No. And so she said, next time they ask you out to dinner, take them to McDonald's. And that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, tell them you're
So,
not hungry. You just ate.
yeah, right.
Even if
Yeah.
you haven't, and then go to McDonald's.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So,
Yeah, no,
uh,
it is a harsh game,
yeah.
and I know it well, and you have so many great stories to tell, from that. Um,
Hmm.
talk about transitioning, out of autograph into other things that you've done since then. Obviously, you've been heavy into music instruction, education.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
after the autograph thing, I didn't really want to play in another band right away. I thought, I'm going to give it a break because we just did 6 years of just nothing but plowing through everything. There was no breaks at all, during
right.
that whole period. And
And the
so,
industry was changing, early
yeah,
90s,
right,
with the whole
exactly.
grunge thing and all
The
that.
whole grunge thing came in, and like I was saying before, we got done with the 3 album deal with RCA. Then we were talking with Epic about another 3 album deal with them. But then, and they loved the demos that we were giving us. Those songs ended up on another album anyway. They came out in 1997, autographed album. It's called Missing Pieces. So those demos were actually on that album. But what happened was, they said, "Look, there's no reason to sign you. No radio stations are going to play you." And we knew that already. We watched the whole trend happening. It was
Yeah.
it
And
was a
funny enough, it's
drastic.
coming from Seattle, your old
Right,
hometown there.
exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was
Alice in
thinking,
Chains and
right. And I was
Soundgarden.
thinking
And
to myself, and I'm going, wait a minute. When Nirvana first came out, I went, this is the way the Seattle bands sound. They're like, their whole thing is a raw sound. They're kind of like a punk garage band kind
yeah,
of
they're
thing.
like underground.
Yeah, right, exactly. That was the scene up there. And so I said, it's nothing new. It's just the way Seattle bands sound. So that's why you had, all these bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and
Yep.
Soundgarden and Alice in
Oh,
Chains and everything.
yeah.
They're all coming out of Seattle. I'm going, no, these are just Seattle bands. This is the way they sound,
Well,
and
the dagger was the execs at MTV that said, "All right, enough of these hair bands. We're gonna go
yeah,
grunge."
yeah, exactly.
And when they flipped the switch,
Yeah.
the
When
labels
they
had to
put on
respond. They're like, "Whoa,
Right.
whoa, man,
It
we're
was
gonna lose
Smells Like
millions
Teen
on this."
Spirit. It was Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's the one that really,
Yeah.
really kind of changed everything, that whole dynamic. So,
Yeah, and of course here in LA, you always had K Rock. K Rock was always playing
yeah,
alternative music. It was nothing
yeah,
new.
yeah,
But now all of a sudden you had this like crossover. It's
yep.
like, you can call it alternative or punk rock or whatever, but the
Hmm.
mainstream, the kids
Yeah,
watching MTV want Nirvana and Pearl Jam,
yeah,
and it was
yeah,
Lollapalooza and
yeah,
the
that's
Warp
right.
Tour and all that. So
Yeah. So it
it
was
was
kind of cool seeing, I'm hometown bands, even though I didn't know of many of them because none of them were around
no.
in late 77, early
Well, the
78
Wilson
when I left.
sisters, Hart kind of embraced a number of those bands.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
kind of looked up to them as like the godmothers, of Seattle,
yeah, absolutely.
and they
Yeah,
created that Bad Animal studio up there.
yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So
So,
yeah,
yeah,
that was kind of cool. But I found
yeah,
it harsh. There were bands in L.A. that were playing the whiskey and the coconut teaser and all that. They couldn't
mhm,
get signed,
right.
to compete with Warren and Poison and all that. And now
Yeah,
they're like, guys, we got to go get some flannel shirts out
yeah,
on the
exactly.
Melrose,
Yeah.
down at the used
Oh,
clothing
yeah.
stores.
It was
And
so
we
funny
can't wash
because,
our hair for a week, man. And we got to
right,
move
yeah,
up to the
exactly.
206.
Well, also what was really funny is all of a sudden you're seeing these models out on the runway wearing these plaid real short skirts and with
Yeah,
Doc
like
Martens on.
lumberjack.
I'm going. This is the way they dress in Seattle is because of the weather. They have long johns on,
Yeah,
and
it
they have
rains a lot.
their yeah, and they have their plaid shirts, and they have their Doc Marten boots and holey jeans. And I'm just going, this is a Seattle look. This is like nothing new. This is the way it's always been up there
Oh,
because
sure.
I used to dress like that when I lived up there. So that was
Yeah, it
how.
gets cold.
Yeah.
I
So
mean, when I was up there, it'd be like 9 months of like rain and then
yeah, that's right.
snow, and
Yeah.
and then in the spring when the sun started to come out, it was like heaven. It was like, oh my
Yeah.
God, and
It's
yet
one
like,
of the most beautiful places you could I would bring people up into the North Cascades Highway, and I'd bring them over into up by Mount Rainier and over
oh,
by
sure,
Hurricane Ridge and the Olympic Mountains and the whole River Valley and all that,
so
and
green.
it looked like you were in the Swiss Alps or something. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
it looked, or in The Sound of Music, it looked like you were in that too.
right,
So, and I'm going,
Switzerland
this
or
is
something.
Washington, man. This is, yeah, right. This is Washington. This is the way it looks. It looks like the most gorgeous places in the world. You have it right here, all the waterfalls and everything, and the moss hanging off the trees and all
Yeah,
that
the
is,
lakes and
yeah,
ocean, the
everywhere. Yeah,
islands, all that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that was the benefit of those months of rain
yeah,
is in the summer you could look at them and like, oh man, it's a beautiful field. I played soccer at the time when I was up
yeah,
there, and we would go to Everett and all these places to
yeah,
play
yeah,
games,
yeah.
and it's like breathtaking.
Oh yeah,
Between the green grass of the soccer field and the forests and emerald, all around it, you're like,
yeah.
yeah, like you say, you're in the Sound of Music or something.
Right. Yeah, it was quite incredible, and I miss it to this day. Like I said earlier, I had to move down here because the black mold wasn't agreeing with me up there. I was allergic to the black mold, and then
Mm.
at that time I owned the music school, so all my students were always coming in sick, and so
Oh wow.
and so I was always getting sick, and my pulmonology specialist, because I had the beginning symptoms of COPD, and he said he
Uh-huh.
said, you've got to get out of Seattle. You've got to. You
Oh
shouldn't
wow.
stay here another winter. It was getting serious. And so a month later, I'd already sold my house. So a month later, I was in a truck, a 24-foot Ryder truck, and having my car towed behind it. And I was driving by myself from Seattle to Florida. And I wasn't even sure where I was going to go in Florida. Like I said, I lived in Fort Lauderdale before from 92 to 97. But this time it was 2016. And I decided, well, I guess I'll try the West Side this time. So I ended up in Tampa, and that's where I'm at right now. And then I plan on moving to the Boca Del Rey area on the east side, back over there, back near my old stomping grounds over there. And so
Oh
I'll be
wow.
back there before the end of the year. So
Well, yeah, from coast to coast, man. From
yeah,
Washington to South Florida, man. You couldn't go
yeah,
further,
right, exactly.
away.
Both areas are
That's like
equally
going from San
beautiful,
Diego
but
to Maine or something.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so it's just turned out to be a great thing that I ended up back here because I feel absolutely wonderful down here. I feel very healthy, and it's nothing like the way I was feeling up in Seattle. Yeah, so it's a very fortunate
Yeah,
thing.
no,
Yeah,
Seattle is a great place to visit, but I could never imagine living there anymore. But
yeah,
I got friends and stuff that live in Washington State, and
yeah.
it is
Seattle's a great
beautiful.
city too. It's such
Oh
a cool
yeah,
hip
and,
city.
and and look at the tech companies, the
I know
Microsofts and
exactly.
Amazon and
Yeah, yeah.
Costco and
Nintendo,
Starbucks and
the
all
list
that
goes
up
on
there.
and on. Real time networks. I mean, it just goes on and on and
Yeah,
on. So,
and even
yeah,
Vancouver. Vancouver's got a lot of
yeah,
TV and film business up there, and
yeah,
of course, as you remember back in the '80s, all the bands were going to Little Mountain Sound up in Vancouver.
yeah.
Bruce
Right.
Fairborn, Bob
Yeah,
Rock,
yeah,
all those guys.
yeah,
Um, Brendan O'Brien, everybody goes up there now. AC/DC, Motley Crue,
yeah,
Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, Van
yeah.
Halen. They were
And the
all
list
going
goes
up
on.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
and and just like kind of grunge, I'm thinking, God, when I was up in Vancouver, there was nobody. Brian Adams was
yeah.
from there and Loverboy,
Right.
but now all
Yeah,
these international mega bands. And once Bon
yeah.
Jovi had Slippery When Wet, they made every album in Vancouver after that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like you don't mess with the
Yeah,
sound, man, when you got a mega hit like that.
yeah, right. Exactly.
We're going
Uh,
back to the same place with the
yeah,
same producer and the same mixer. You know,
yeah.
it's just
Why
like,
change it? Why change it up? You know.
oh
So
shit.
yeah. Then on our third album, we got to work with Andy Johns again,
Okay,
and he's one to produce that album. And
that's right.
that was like I said, the first two albums we only spent a month, 30 days on each album, and that's
Yeah.
including mixing and mastering. And
Wow.
then on with Andy Johns, we spent 3 months in the studio, and that is loud and clear. The third album is my favorite album because
Okay.
our writing chops as a band and individually had come together more. It just we really seemed to be well linked at that point. And
Well, you kind of learn from the second album what not to do, and
right,
give
yeah,
it a little more
absolutely,
time. And this was
yeah,
also at the record plant. Did you go back there?
yes, we did,
Oh
yeah,
wow.
yeah. All three albums was room A at the record plant.
My
Yeah.
God, you should have had seniority, like a
I know.
special discount over there or something.
Yeah,
Your own key
and yeah,
card.
yeah, we should have invested in that because
Yeah. Go tell Chris Stone, man, he owes you something.
that's right. I will.
Well, that's incredible.
Yeah.
What else do you really feel proud of getting off your chest in the book? There's so many great stories
I
and
think that
inspiration.
you know, well, of course, the whole graduating from the Guitar Institute, and then forming the band Autograph that eventually turned out to be a pretty big hit, and then owning my own school, recording my solo album, Network 23, traveling, doing 325 clinics, promoting my books,
Wow.
the Right Touch books 1, 2, and 3. Um, and then that was 325 clinics in 20 countries. That was a huge thing. I mean, what an experience to be able to do that,
And
And
who's the publisher on those?
oh, that was, well, first of all, it was Dale Zdenek. That
Okay.
was Tommy Tedesco and
Oh, the GIT
Howard
guys.
Roberts. Yeah, and then that got buttoned up by Bellwin Mills, and then Bellwin Mills got a lot of their catalog bought up from Warner Brothers. So it went through three different publishing places, but now I own the books outright. So
Okay.
I'm going to be re-releasing those eventually after this. It's one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So now I have the book and I'm pretty busy with that, and so and then another thing I was proud of was the solo album that I did, Network 23. I did that all on my own, except for I had Chris Frazier from he played with Steve Vai, and him and Mangini, both of them played with Steve Vai. Mike Mangini went on to play with
Dream
Dream
Theater.
Theater,
Yep.
and then Chris Frazier, has been with White Snake and then Foreigner for like well over probably close to 2 decades now. But anyway, I had those guys come in and do the drums, and then I had a vocalist named Scott Gilman, who's also an amazing saxophonist. Which he plays with Jeff Goldblum, and he does stuff on his own, but he's doing some gigs with Lou Graham and stuff. And so, just an amazing songwriter, composer, saxophonist, vocalist. And so I had him sing on that album as well. And it's completely different from the Autograph thing. It was in 1995
Yeah.
that I recorded all that. But when I tried to shop it, Marco Babino, I used him from
I know
Marco Babino
Marco.
used
Yeah. Geffen.
Marco from
Yeah.
Geffen Records. Yeah, I used him to shop it, and he said, "Steve, nobody's even going to give it a listen." I mean, everybody I give it to, they just basically say, "No, this is useless," because Steve is an '80s rock guitarist. That's what he's known for, and nobody's going to want to sign this. There's no way. And so I reached a dead end, and eventually I just shelved it, and just decided, well, I'll release it at another point, which I will. I'll remaster it and release it again.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where I had that stigma attached to me because I'm an '80s personality. So that's
Yeah, I mean, what do you got to do? You got to change your name, change your
yeah,
look. I mean,
yeah, right, exactly.
it's
So
crazy. Like
yeah, and then
people want
after
to put
that,
you in a box and not
yeah,
let you
right,
breathe.
yeah. But after that, you know, um, then I owned the music school, which was very successful. And up
Yeah.
until
What
2016.
what part of Seattle was that in?
That was in Federal Way.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
down
just
by
south
the
of
airport.
Seattle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
SeaTac.
exactly. Yeah, right, exactly. So that was called Federal Way School of Music, and yeah, it was very successful. So, but then I started to play. Me and Randy started up another version of Autograph, and we played some gigs with that for a while.
Yeah.
And
I
then
saw you guys down at Irvine Meadows do
oh
a
yeah,
show.
yeah, that was a great show. I remember that.
Yeah.
And so that basically that came to an end, and then what happened was I was invited from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to donate some instruments. Like, so I brought down one of my original guitars, that I did all the recording
Okay.
and tour with. And Randy's famous bass is called Nuns in a Blender. And this
Wow.
was after Randy passed, of course. Randy passed in
Amazing.
April 26th of 2022. Terrible tragedy, but it
Yes.
just
Yes.
happened. And of course, the other two members, Steve Isham passed away in
Well,
2008, and then Kenny Richards passed away in 2017. So,
yeah. I mean, you and Steve Plunkett are the only two
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
surviving. I spoke to Steve recently, and yeah, no, it's amazing that you still have all this energy, but
yeah.
so many
Well,
of
yeah,
your bandmates are no longer with us. It's just
yeah. I mean,
insane.
yeah, still going. I surprise myself sometimes, but I look at it like it's all it's been a very long run, and it's still going. I still have music in the future, but right now, like I said, I'm concentrating on the book. Because that's just now coming out May 20th, and so I'm going to put most of my energy into that, and then next year is when I'll really start focusing on making new music again, whether it be putting together another autograph, or it might be a solo project, or I might just be recording for a while. I haven't decided quite yet, but it's an open playing field for me, so I look forward to
Yeah.
just doing whatever I feel like. And so, but I think that the last thing that was being invited. We weren't inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We were just invited to put some instruments, and stuff on display,
Well,
and they did a
sure. I mean,
write up on
that's
us.
an honor. You're
It's a huge honor.
you're
It
rubbing
it really is.
shoulders
Yeah,
with the biggest
yeah,
icons, in that
yeah.
hall.
Right, right. And you see, and what was cool is when the unveiling of the guitars, and the display there, and then I had my girlfriend with me, and we got engaged right there,
Oh,
right
wow.
in front of
You
everybody.
popped the
It's,
question right
yeah,
there.
and it's a really cool story. Remember, I told you we started touring with Van Halen back in January of 1984. Well, I
Uh-huh.
actually met her back then, but she was going off to college, and I lived in LA, and she was going to college in Providence, Rhode Island, and so we just kind of lost touch. But then, as of 4 years ago, this month, as a matter of fact, 4 years ago, um, they she was out to dinner with friends, and they were talking about the first concert they went to, and she said, "Oh, I went to Van Halen was my first concert back in 1984," and she says, "In fact, I met this guy that was playing in the opening band. His name was Steve, and I think the name of the band was Autograph. And but there was three Steves in the band." So this time, 4 years ago, they just they looked on Instagram for me, and they found me, and she said, "That's it, that's that guy." And so we really made a great connection back then. But I was off touring and living in LA, and she was, so there was nothing we could really do about it. But then she actually sent me a message on Instagram, and I answered her, and she was coming down to, my neck of the woods to Clearwater, Florida, which is right very close to where I live, and she was going down there. She was working with the Philadelphia Phillies. She lives up in New Jersey, so she was working with them, and so anyway, we got together for dinner, and we hit it off just like all that time, like 36 years later, and we just hit it off, and it was just such a magical thing, and here we are today. Now we're engaged to be married, and everything. So yeah, it's a very very cool love story because of that 36-year span, and now we're back together. So We had
Well,
that spark,
yeah,
and that
no,
spark
it's
never
a
died out.
yeah, that's a Cinderella story, no doubt. I mean,
Yeah,
the fact that you had a spark and it reconnected, and
yeah,
you guys were in the right place at the right time to, celebrate that. That's
yeah,
amazing
absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah,
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 no, it's really it's great to hear,
yeah.
and I know everybody is going to get a real kick out of the book. Again, it's
I think they
Confessions of a
will.
Rock Star. No,
Yeah.
there's no
No,
question about
Confessions of
it.
a Rock Guitarist.
Oh,
Yeah,
there we go.
yeah,
Confessions of a Rock Guitarist.
yeah.
Yes, and it's really once you start reading it, you can't put it down because
Well, thank you, thank you for that.
it's a
Yeah,
roller coaster ride, you
it
know?
is. Yeah, because there's some good things that happen, and then right down to the bottom again.
Yeah.
But like I said, you learn from all these things, and
Well,
that the accumulation of it all leads up to who you are in the end. And so now I am at 70 years old, and I really like where I sit right now.
if you don't get a chance to, learn from the lows,
Hmm.
you don't have a chance probably to get back up to the heights.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
You know what I mean? You can't depend on luck and a wing and a prayer. I mean, you have
yeah,
to,
all right.
you have to stack the deck with some knowledge, some connections,
Yeah,
some momentum.
all of it's in the mix. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult business as it is, but if you don't have that knowledge and those connections and, momentum,
Yeah,
you're trying to win the lottery. And what are those odds,
yeah, right. Exactly, exactly.
Well,
Which
Steve,
I still play the lottery though.
well, there you go. I mean, somebody's got to win.
That's right.
You never know. But yeah, I like the odds of believing in yourself and
Yeah.
building based on knowledge and all that great. It's the relationships.
Yes,
It's
absolutely. It really
still
is. It
after
really
all
is.
these years,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
And always
You
keeping
talk
a
to
cool
people.
head. And I think one of the things that I'm really thankful for is just I've always been kind to my students. I've been kind to my fans, and I've always interacted with them. And I think that the payback for that has just been, the friendships that I have with them and the respect I have for them and the respect they have for me. And so it's a two-way street. It's a very nice road to be on.
Yeah, it really is. Our special guest has been the one and only Steve Lynch. We love him from Autograph, all the tales. Go get that book. It is Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. And Steve, wow, we can't thank you enough. Always a pleasure to speak to you. We look forward to
Absolutely.
charting your course with this book and, of course, new music. So until we speak again, please keep rocking forever and keep that song in your heart.
You got it. And thank you for having me on, Jay. I really appreciate it. And it's just a pleasure talking with you.